Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News from the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is June 4th, 2026. Just how profitable is union busting? Who, or what, other than humans, can vote in Delaware? What government wants to put ankle monitors on your kids? Which pro-Palestine media personalities has Britain barred from entry? How many tens of thousands of acres of peach trees are being destroyed in California to protect farmers' profits? Why do New Jersey State Police deny live-stream journalists their freedom of press? How are Honduras, Argentina, and the United States conspiring an attack on Mexico? How is Tennessee planning a database of trans citizens? How is stealth marketing curating your so-called organic social media feeds? How is Congress trying to integrate Israel into the United States government? In what ways is the Trump administration rewarding January 6th terrorists? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the video description, and subscribe to stay informed.
Well, you'll feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
The real cost of union busting is much higher than you think. May 21st, 2026 via Jacobin. The most militant class warriors in the United States aren't New York City nurses, UPS delivery drivers, or Midwestern auto workers. They're employers who are willing to spend big to maintain their dictatorial control over the workplace in the pursuit of maximizing profits. A new study conducted by the Economic Policy Institute, the EPI, and Labor Lab estimates that employers spent about $1.7 billion on union avoidance specialists and union busting attorneys in 2024. The jointly authored report is one of the most expansive and thorough estimates of union avoidance costs performed in decades. 70% of Americans support unions, and millions would join one if they could. The report shows how far employers are willing to go to keep the deck stacked against workers, said Bob Funk, founder and executive director of Labor Lab. Union busting is a profitable investment because it provides employers with a bulwark against both workers and public scrutiny. Despite taking a far more expansive look at the union busting industry, the report acknowledges that it understates what employers actually spend to suppress organizing. It excludes many internal costs, such as maintaining union prevention systems and employee surveillance operations, as well as major external costs beyond consultants and anti-union law firms. Extrapolating from BLS data, Labor Lab told Jacobin it estimates that employers spend roughly $8 billion annually on labor and employee relations specialists, and another $40 billion on human relations or HR managers. According to Labor Lab, at least half of spending on labor and employee relations specialists, and at least 10% of spending on HR management, should be understood as union avoidance spending. By that estimate, employers are spending at least $8 billion annually on internal anti-union infrastructure alone. A 2025 survey of HR professionals, senior executives, and in-house attorneys by notorious union-busting law firm Littler Mendelsohn acknowledges that nearly half of non-union employers have rolled out or expanded employee engagement programs, specifically to head off organizing. These initiatives, which range from internal surveys to structured listening campaigns, typically cost between 1% and 2% of total payroll. Given that U.S. wages run into the trillions, even allocating a small share of that spending towards union avoidance would push the true cost of employer anti-union activity far beyond what has been estimated by EPI and Labor Lab, potentially into the tens of billions annually. And that may still understate the real cost of union avoidance. Employers also spend enormous sums raising wages and benefits to deter organizing, as non-union auto companies did after the United Auto Workers stand-up strike. Once those costs are included, the true price of suppressing unions may run into the hundreds of billions annually. If corporations are willing to incur billions of dollars in costs, financial and productivity losses, legal exposure, and reputational damage, rather than recognizing a union or agreeing to a contract, what exactly are they defending? Employers are not choosing workplace control over the maximization of profits, but seeking to maintain workplace control as the means for maximizing profits, said Vivek Chibber, a professor of sociology at New York University. Employers are not confused or irrational. They're acting like a class of people who understand exactly what is at stake. one of the most important notes to make about our current situation economically, I guess, as a working class in the United States in particular, but in much of the world, is that where the working class may, and in often case absolutely lacks solidarity and class solidarity, the ruling class has never lacked solidarity. The ruling class is always in solidarity with their class, and they always move to support their class, as we know, at the expense of ours. And that is pretty much the whole summary of this article. And thankfully, people in the article, point that out. They are a class of people who understand exactly what is at stake. And what is at stake, the article doesn't quite highlight this part for us, but of course we know that what is at stake is the ruling class losing their position of power and having to work for a living like everybody else. That is one of the things that unions represent, is overall and ultimately the success of the working class. The unions are a step towards, or at least should be a step towards, in the United States it often is not, but should be a step towards working class power and working class seizing control of the means of production, and in general a broader working class and socialist system. What the ruling class stands to lose is not just tens of billions of dollars. What they stand to lose is power and control over the production of that money. And of course, they make that money by exploiting the workers, by taking our surplus value, by having us do the labor and then them keep the profits, keep the rewards. And every time we demand a little bit of more of that, a little bit more, they lose. Even if they're making $20 billion a year, and if suddenly they're making $19 billion a year, they have lost. And they will never allow that to happen, which is why they spend so much on keeping us in control. Because, like the article points out, and I was very surprised by this, I was very surprised that the article points this out. In any case, I'm not surprised, of course, and you aren't surprised to hear this either. The ruling class makes their money by controlling us. And their control over the working class is not an expense, but the means to their wealth. And we as workers do need to band together and take what is ours, which is, of course, these super profits. Those tens of billions of dollars that they're spending on union-busting activity is not their money. It's our money that they stole from us in the first place and then spend to oppress us. It's one of the many ironies and many contradictions about living in the capitalist society in the West. And capitalist societies in general, but specifically for the West, is that all of the oppression of the West comes from the wealth that we create. Or in many other cases, the wealth that we create, it funds material oppression on other people, especially in the global South, to then completely steal way more from them than gets stolen from us. We lose our profits at the factory, they lose everything. They lose, oftentimes, straight up their lives, their villages. They lose their towns and cities, their independence. They lose their natural resources. Everything gets looted from them. And of course, the soldiers going over there to pillage them, and the economic pressures that are exerted by the U.S. empire through either sanctions or through the IMF and other such predatory systems of finance are funded initially by us and then maintained and sustained through the looting of and pillaging of the global South. And so when we start to push back against that, when we start to take power into our hands, when we start to unionize and organize and fight against the oppression that we face as proletarians, as the working class here at home, the end goal needs to be to also pull back our own forces from other places and reel them in and crush them here at home as well. Because unfortunately, what we have often become with our unions in particular is a labor aristocracy, where, yeah, we're workers and yeah, we're oppressed by capital, but we benefit and receive the benefits of imperialism and oppression of other people. We get to say, oh, well, you know, we blew up Iraq, but at least we get cheap gas prices, and that makes it worth it. Even if we don't openly say that, that is, of course, the prevailing attitude, that people in the global south, that other workers who are oppressed, not necessarily through union busting, although major corporations such as, right off the rip, Coca-Cola has been doing in Colombia, does occur. They have major union busting and anti-worker activities that come down to straight hitmen and gangster violence in ways that we often don't see exactly in the United States anymore. But we need to make sure that we don't exert that ourselves as a working class on other people. Because, of course, you know, we might say, well, we need free healthcare, we need better pay, we need to own our means of production, which is great. But if our means of production are seized, but we're still resorting to raping the global south, invading the Congo and taking their cobalt and forcing their children to be slaves in order to mine the cobalt cheaply so that way we can all have brand new smartphones every year, what has been gained? And so, but to circle back to the article, it's important for us to remember that our actions start as being a unified class, and that is unified along our working class lines, first and foremost. We cannot be tossing out anyone else for their race, for their religion, for their gender, sexuality. Of course, we shouldn't be doing that anyway, and we need to understand that. And we need to make sure that the other people who are going to be inclined to join us across class lines understand that they can't be kicking out other working class people for their immutable characteristics either. So we need to unify as a working class in order to take power from the ruling class, which has been, using these union busting activities, both militant and more procedural, if we will, methods to maintain their control over us. And then when we wrestle that power from them, we then also have to wrestle that power, our power, back from overseas, into our countries, and start real processes of anti-imperialism and decolonization, both abroad and, for many of us, especially in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, etc., decolonization at home. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Delaware court upholds voting by companies in small towns election. May 26, 2026 via Reuters. A judge in Delaware, where many big U.S. companies are incorporated, ruled on Tuesday that a small town that allows corporations to vote in municipal elections was not violating the state's constitution. Delaware Superior Court Judge Craig Karsnitz said the beach town of Fenwick Island was not diluting human votes by allowing companies and other legal entities that own property to cast votes in municipal elections. The American Civil Liberties Union of Delaware sued the town, arguing it violated the Elections Clause of the state constitution. The group sought a court order blocking Fenwick Island from counting votes by non-human artificial entities in future elections. The group said entities make up about 12% of the registered voters in the town. A lawyer for the organization did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The town's mayor, Natalie Magdeburger, did not immediately respond to a request for comment either, but told Reuters in March that the city believes a property owner who pays taxes and is subject to our ordinances should have a say in who represents them on our town council. Non-resident voting in local elections has been permitted in Fenwick Island since it was incorporated in 1953, according to the court ruling. In 2008, Delaware's General Assembly amended the charter to allow non-resident voting by artificial entities, including corporations, partnerships, trusts, and limited liability companies, which must be chartered in Delaware. Several other towns in Delaware allow companies and other legal entities to vote in local elections if they own property in the municipality. Karsnitz ruled on Tuesday that the town's charter did not violate the state's constitution's elections clause, which says all elections should be free and equal. The judge said the clause had been understood by courts to mean free of fraud and noted that there were no allegations of racial or other kinds of discrimination. Karsnitz said he appreciated that the ACLU of Delaware might disagree with corporate voting. Visions of faceless large corporations or even HAL controlling a small town are frightening and the stuff of science fiction, he wrote, referring to the computer at the center of the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. However, plaintiff has not demonstrated that this policy violates the principle of one person, entity, or one vote. Delaware has far more corporations chartered in the state than residents, and despite recent movement by some companies to move their state of incorporation elsewhere, it remains the legal home to most publicly traded companies. We have a good handful of, frankly, obscene articles to discuss. This is the first among them. This is, frankly, a sign of the times. This is Democracy Manifest. This is American Democracy Manifest, where corporations are treated as people, kind of like in Citizens United and such, but corporations are treated as people who can even vote in local elections. Now, we all know that they already vote in federal elections. Basically how candidates get chosen. 90% of the candidates who win are the candidates who raise the most money, and 50% of donations come from 3% of donors, something like that. Most of the time, it's the rich who pick the candidates in the first place, let alone pick the winners, and we just put our stamp of approval on it through our little vote at the end of the year. But having this go all the way down to literally voting in elections is bizarre, and I can believe that this has been allowed, and it's been allowed for so long, especially in Delaware, and it's no mistake that Joe Biden comes from Delaware. But it's also appalling to anyone of sense. And the explanation here that, a property owner who pays taxes and is subject to our ordinances should have a say who represents them on our town council. Why? Why should they have a say who levies taxes on property if they're not going to live and work there? How is that their business? Why is government being chosen by property instead of by people? This is exactly like the, there are no blue states, there are only blue cities kind of thing where, yep, sorry man, property doesn't vote. Land doesn't vote. But apparently in Delaware, it does. And let's even just boil this down to something far more localized. Imagine you live in your city and you rent, and your landlord lives somewhere else, maybe even as far as out of state. They get to vote for your elections. They get to vote for your town council, your city council. They get to vote for your mayor. They get to vote for your police chief. They get to vote for your coroner. It's a very Pennsylvania thing to do, is vote for the coroner. And these are all vote for your tax collector, vote for your tax assessor, vote for your school board. Why should your landlord choose any of that for you? Your landlord obviously shouldn't exist. Your landlord's a parasite and should not be leeching off your need for housing. And that's a slightly different conversation. But your landlord's already leeching off you. Your landlord's already stealing your money. In exchange, you get to use a house that they can't use. So they're already hoarding property from the needy in order to sell it back to them at a premium. And then on top of that, they get to choose or have a voice in choosing, at our most generous, everything else that goes on to your life. So not only does your landlord get to control what paint you can put in your child's bedroom, they also get to choose who monitors your child at school with the school board elections. They get to choose who gets to pick your child's curriculum. They get to choose who gets to pave your roads or sweep your streets. They get to choose who decides the property tax for a house that they don't live in. They get to choose, who polices your neighborhood, who sends armed thugs to go and put down and oppress your poor neighbors. How is that fair? How is that reasonable? And then, of course, we'll take it a step further. Walmart gets to do that? Walmart? There's a Walmart in your community, and now suddenly they get to have a voice because they own the building and pay taxes on the building? How is that fair? And I understand to a very slight extent the argument of, well, if they're going to pay taxes, then they should be able to decide who gets to choose what those taxes are and where that money goes. Intellectually, there might be some grounds there, but think about anyone who works in another town and pays that town's municipal taxes. So what, if I live in my city but work in another city, I get to choose how that city runs? Where does it end? If I buy gas in the city in between, I'm paying their tax on that. Do I get a voice there? And then, of course, if you want to manipulate a city and or even especially a small town and you're pretty wealthy, buy up a bunch of homes, rent them all out. Do you get one vote, or do you get a vote for every single property that you own? On top of that, all of that aside, all of the problems with that aside, why don't people, the actual people who live in a community, why aren't they the only ones making the decision? And we can talk about, small-time landlords, oh, you're a landlord, but that is a person. What about the landlord corporation? Some BlackRock, for example. If they own 100,000 houses in Delaware, they get to vote in all of those municipal elections as a corporation? I can't believe that this is so accepted in the state of Delaware. I mean, I can believe it. Not that surprising. This is American capital at work. The government and the entire United States runs for the benefit of capital. They don't run for the benefit of the people, they run for the benefit of capital. They run for the benefit of capitalists, who are, need I remind you, not people who support capitalism, but people who own capital, people who own means of production, and people who own things like property, private property, that they then rent back or sell back or use to exploit the working class, the bourgeoisie. This is the most bourgeois concept I can think of, is allowing the bourgeoisie to vote in local elections because they own private property within those districts. And this is, it's appalling. And the last comment I have to say on that is, yeah, I do know it's Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I've seen the movie more times than I had time to spend on it. I just read it wrong because I thought it was going somewhere else. My mistake, but I do know that it's Hal, and I did know that when I read the teleprompter. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Sweden plans electronic bracelets to monitor children at risk of gang recruitment. May 7, 2026 via Euronews. Sweden said on Thursday that it planned to introduce electronic bracelets to monitor children at risk of being recruited by criminal gangs, the government's latest measure at cracking down on deadly gang violence. Authorities would be able to assign the bracelets to children and youths aged 13 and up, the government said, estimating that around 50 to 100 youths would be monitored to ensure that they were respecting curfews decided by social services. Criminal gangs in Sweden increasingly recruit children and youths to commit murders and other violent acts, knowing that they will not face prison time if caught, as the age of criminal responsibility has until now been 15. As of the 1st of July, the age will be reduced to 13 for crimes punishable by at least 4 years in prison. The electronic bracelet would be designed to look like a watch or bracelet, so it wouldn't be as obvious or stigmatizing as an ankle bracelet used for convicted criminals, Social Services Minister Camilla Watterson Gronvall told reporters. She said there were 173 children under the age of 15 suspected of being involved in murders or murder plots. In addition, there were 52 so-called evidentiary proceedings against children last year, a legal process where a court decides if a child under the age of criminal responsibility is guilty, but the child is not punished. The electronic bracelet proposal has faced criticism from children's rights organizations, Sweden's National Council for Crime Prevention, and UNICEF, who have all expressed concerns about children's civil liberties. Swedish police have since October 2025 been allowed to wiretap electronic communications of children under the age of 15. When children are at risk of falling into the clutches of serious criminals, we must have more tools to protect them, Walterson Granvall said in a statement. Electronic monitoring should be usable in serious situations, in order to break a destructive pattern in time and guarantee the child's safety, she said. Sweden's minority right-wing government, propped up by the far-right Sweden Democrats, has been pushing through a rash of proposals aimed at curbing crime and immigration in the run-up to the general election on the 13th of September. Another crazy news article. No prizes for correctly guessing what color skin the children who are going to be having these bracelets is. The idea of tracking children, of monitoring them with bracelets and whatnot to make sure they're abiding by curfews so that way at-risk kids can't be groomed by gangs for gang violence is nothing short of a complete violation of human rights. Nobody else gets tracked and monitored for pre-crime in ways that we consider to be acceptable in any case. Obviously, the United States does it all the time to people who are or perceived to be some sort of dissident. It reminds me of the deep infiltration and surveillance of mosques in particular and Muslim American communities following 9/11. And of course, now with creating lists and of trans people and whatever for their violent or nihilistic violent extremists and whatnot. But this whole trend towards pre-crime and monitoring people for pre-crime going beyond the United States into now Sweden is nothing short of appalling. We're going to be stripping children of their bodily autonomy in order to track them on the pretense that they might end up getting involved in gang or criminal activity. We all know that crime is a child of poverty, and that gangs are, as much as some people like to imagine that they're some sort of revolutionary organization, they are a reactionary element of the working class, and in some capacities lumpen proletariat. They are basically aspirationally bourgeoisie who, just like the rest of the ruling class, gains power and wealth by abusing and manipulating and stealing from the working class. And so, the solution, of course, to gang violence and to gang crime is to liberate the working class and to have a society in which the working class has dignity and has power instead of the bourgeoisie. And I know a lot of people like to fantasize that the Scandinavian countries are socialist. They're not. They are at best social democrats. They are a society that is capitalist with some very nice social safety nets. They're not socialist by any stretch of the imagination. And a lot of the time, their wealth is based on extraction or from the global south and based on the extraction of wealth from the working class. Sweden is by far no exception to this, and they have a huge white nationalist problem that's been growing. It's been there forever, but Sweden used to be an imperialist state in a more classical European sense, and they had colonies in the New World even, and ever since, of course, the refugee crisis coming from particularly Syria, they've gone full-blown neo-Nazi. And so, again, like I said, no prizes for guessing what color children are going to be monitored. But we'll strip children of their bodily autonomy in order to fight crime, but we won't actually improve the material conditions for the impoverished people to eliminate the drive for and pull of organized crime. I'd like to see that make sense. The belief that children are effectively property of their parents, or in other cases of the state, is deeply insidious and should not be permitted whatsoever. We don't tolerate that kind of mindset for anybody else. When someone tries to argue that women should be property of their families, of their husbands, of their fathers, of their brothers, very few people, especially from the left, but very few people would accept that as being literally true. And everyone who does, we immediately dismiss as some kind of freak. But when it's children, we're perfectly content to see them as property, as an extension of the parent, until they turn 18, as an arbitrary indicator that they are now an independent person and not property, and not a pet, not someone to boss around and kick around and to strap GPSs onto in order to make sure that they're in bed on time. Maybe the anarchists have a point with bedtime abolition when it comes to bullshit like this. I joke. The anarchists are friends. Monitoring children for curfew, whose responsibility that is? The parents. If my mom doesn't want me out past 9 p.m., she's not going to slap a GPS tracker on me. Although, with the smartphones in everyone's pockets now, a lot of parents do rely on that. I'm not going to comment on one parent's personal decision, and maybe that's right for your family or not. I am going to comment on the government strapping children with GPSs in order to make sure that they're in bed on time. This is absurd, it's totalitarian, it's fascistic, and again, it is an assault on the rights and dignity of children. They're already going to be trying to prosecute children at the age of 13 as criminal adults, and maybe I can understand that in these circumstances in which they're claiming that children are going around committing murders because they know they'll get away with it. Not all that invested into Swedish politics. I have to imagine that's not quite as true as the article seems to believe it is, that if a child commits a murder before they turn 15, that's it, they just get away with it. But the solution is, of course, equitable social reform, and honestly, equitable social revolution, and a change, an economic, material change to the conditions that poor people, that the proletariat, that the lumpen proletariat exist in, so that way pursuing the gang life, if you will, is less appealing and has less influence over them. That's the solution, not tracking and monitoring these children who are allegedly at risk for being exploited by criminal gangs. It's embarrassing. And, the next step is, of course, doing the same thing to adults. Because if they can get away with it with kids, no one complaining, they'll keep pushing the envelope. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. UK blocks visits by left-wing US commentators Cenk Uygur and Hasan Piker. June 1st, 2026 via Reuters. Britain has blocked Cenk Uygur, a left-wing Turkish-American media personality, and his nephew Hasan Piker, a US left-wing commentator and influencer, from entering the country to speak at events, both said on Monday. Uygur, who co-hosts the popular YouTube channel The Young Turks, and Piker said that they had been barred because of their views on Israel. Britain's Interior Ministry said travel authorization for these individuals had been cancelled as their presence in the UK may not be conducive to the public good, in a statement that did not mention Israel. In recent weeks, Uygur said on Twitter that Israel was following Nazi logic over its attacks on Lebanon, and said supporting Jerusalem was like being on the side of terrorists, while Piker has said Hamas was 1,000 times better than Israel, and he would vote for Hamas over Israel. In a 2019 video stream, Piker said America deserved 9/11, a remark he subsequently said was inappropriate. He also described allegations Hamas carried out sexual violence during the October 7, 2023 attacks on Israel as rape fantasies during a live stream video in May 2024. Both had been listed to speak at the South by Southwest London Festival later this week and at the University of Oxford this weekend. "I've been barred for criticizing Israel. Are we free anymore?" Uygur posted, after he said he had tried to board a flight. Piker said the UK has revoked my visa as well, all at the behest of Israel. Piker had been due to speak at South by Southwest about how the American left learned to speak the internet. Uygur's session was titled "Techno-Feudalism is Here. Who are the Lords?" There is no mention of Israel in their sections on the website for South by Southwest London, which describes itself as a festival of business, technology, and creativity. Over the last year, U.S. President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance have raised concerns about what they say are infringements on free speech in Britain. In May, the British government barred 11 people from entering the country, whom it described as foreign far-right agitators. They had been due to speak at an event organized by anti-Islam activist Tommy Robinson. Uygur, 56, attracts more than 200 million views a month through the Young Turks, according to the website for South by Southwest London. He was briefly a Democratic nominee in the 2024 presidential election. His 34-year-old nephew has a daily audience of 30,000 people in the live streaming platform Twitch, according to the South by Southwest website. I'm not going to say that these guys are faultless, that Hasan Piker is above criticism, that Cenk Uygur is some kind of flawless guy. I'm not going to hold them up as paragons of virtue or leftism. There are a lot of criticisms of both of them, especially for both of them, especially Hasan Piker. I feel just because of his prevalence on the left, there's a lot of criticism that can be levied. But I think the British government saying that they are not conducive to the public good is a huge overreaction, just to put it the most mildly. The British government does not seem to have as much of a problem with certain right-wing elements. I mean, the article mentions Tommy Robinson in here, who somehow the British still allow to breathe. Explain that one to me. But, these guys are not allowed in the country because they're too pro-Israel. And I know that England is never going to actually admit that. But when it comes to Britain, what is not conducive to the public good? How about the occupation of the north of Ireland, for one? So, I don't exactly trust them. I don't trust the British government as far as I could throw it. I don't see how the royal family is conducive to the public good. I don't see how the occupation of, again, the north of Ireland or its other imperial colonial holdings throughout history have been conducive for the public good. I don't see how their own corporate interests that run the government and exploit the British people is conducive to the public good. So, this is just more examples of right-wing and conservative governments, of which, of course, Britain has one. Keir Starmer is, or Der Starmer, as we like to call him, is a right-wing conservative, as much as he would like to pretend or imagine otherwise. Literally overseeing British support for a genocide. So, and they're just like the United States in that regard. So it's all farce. It's all about control. But as for what the article says about their actual statements that might have inspired this, Cenk Uygur saying that Israel is following Nazi logic. Absolutely. Israel's whole project is built on Lebensraum and the destruction of the Untermensch in favor of the Übermensch. Where do you think they learned it? And that's not even going into the fact that that the early Zionists were actually in cahoots with the Nazis. It's a different question, different topic. But they're invading and destroying and trying to eradicate lesser peoples to create more room for their special Jewish settlers. That's what they've been doing. And only unlike the Nazis, no one else, well, very few people are actually standing up to fight them. We've got Iran, Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen. But of course, when it comes to actual nations, actual countries, actual states, it's only Yemen and Lebanon. So, not exactly, the huge coalition that we saw in the 1940s, unfortunately. Maybe it's one day. Saying America deserved 9/11, provocative. I think it's hard to argue against it. Deserved in a sense that, they had it coming. It was expected. It's product, as Brother Malcolm said, chicken's coming home to roost. Absolutely. Inarguable. Deserved it as in, it's good that it happened. Completely different question. I think we can all agree, no. But, I don't think everyone should get what they deserve, but sometimes we do deserve terrible things. Seeds, don't sow the wind if you don't want to reap the whirlwind. And saying that the allegations of sexual violence were rape fantasies. That is what it is. There are no credible evidence of any sexual violence committed by Hamas against so-called Israelis on October 7th or afterwards. The hostages, the prisoners of war who have since been released, not a single one of them reported sexual violence or impropriety at all. The UN has, very recently, just this week, determined that, absolutely, Israel is committing mass sexual violence against Palestinians, and have still been unable to find a single credible report of sexual violence from Hamas. So, that is all it is. It's a rape fantasy by Israelis who want to imagine their women getting defiled in order to galvanize the international war effort. It's worked so well for particularly Americans and other people across the globe who, as soon as they hear, Hamas raped Israelis, that they go, maybe I'm going to stay out of this one at their most generous. When it didn't happen, there's no evidence that it happened, and it's entirely fantastical and invented in order to continue to propagate the very classic myth of the barbarous Eastern hordes are coming for our precious Western women that we see as justification for everything from lynchings in the South to the invasions in the Middle East. And, so it's also very funny that the U.S. government is complaining about freedom of speech in the UK. First of all, it's not your fucking business. It isn't. Whatever J.D. Vance or Donald Trump think about Britain, it's not really relevant. They're all entitled to their own personal opinions, but Britain's its own country. Too many countries, if you ask me. It's not your business. And, of course, they only raise concerns about this when it's right-wingers who are getting silenced. As soon as someone comes in with criticism of the right and get, silenced, that's the end. But, these guys are still very prevalent. I mean, I grew up watching the Young Turks as a news program. Probably everyone who would watch this video is probably familiar with Hasan Piker and the Young Turks. Very, very prevalent. Watch them at home in Britain on the TV, or on YouTube or whatever. But it's just another step by the Western imperial order to maintain control of public narrative, punish people who don't fall in line with imperialist goals, and are picking targets that are big enough to hit and have people care to send a message, and I guess that's it. Again, all of these guys are complaints about all of them, but no complaint about Hasan, Piker, or Cenk Uygur that comes from the British government is worth listening to. If you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. California farmers to destroy 420,000 peach trees following Del Monte bankruptcy, May 5, 2026, via SF-Gate. Central California farmers are expected to gain up to $9 million in federal aid to help remove 420,000 clingstone peach trees following the closure of Del Monte Foods canneries earlier this year. Del Monte permanently closed its Modesto and Houston canneries in April after filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy last July. The factory closures left hundreds of workers without a job, while also leaving farmers in dire straits as they navigated what to do with their crops. In March, the Sacramento Bee reported that many Central California farmers had their 20-year contracts to grow peaches with Del Monte canceled, while facing a $550 million loss in revenue. The impacts pushed a delegation of California lawmakers to ask the U.S. Department of Agriculture to provide financial support to the fruit growers. Last week, California Senator Adam Schiff and Representatives Mike Thompson and David Valadao announced in a news release that the USDA had approved their request to pay California farmers to remove around 3,000 acres of clingstone peach trees before the harvest season. According to the new release, removing 50,000 tons of peaches from production could help growers save about $30 million in losses. For generations, Central Valley family farms have relied on Del Monte Modesto's facility to process their peaches, and its sudden closure left growers with thousands of pounds of fruit and no clear path forward, Valadao said in the news release. Schiff, Thompson, and Valadao, in addition to 39 other members of Congress, sent a letter to Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins in March, saying that many of the affected California farmers are multi-generational family farmers who have invested in their orchards for decades. They argued that it was necessary to aid these farmers or risk long-term structural damage to our nation's agricultural base. When a processing facility closes and 55,000 acres of fruit suddenly have nowhere to go, that's not something a family farm can just absorb, Thompson said in the news release. This funding is a critical step in ensuring these important multi-generational businesses can stay afloat. Lodi-based Pacific Coast Producers purchased Del Monte's canned fruit business earlier this year, following a court approval to sell all its assets. Pacific Coast Producers offered contracts to farmers to buy 24,000 tons of peaches, but about 50,000 tons will go unused, according to the Sacramento Bee. The works of the roots of the vines of the trees must be destroyed to keep up the price, and this is the saddest, bitterest thing of all. Carloads of oranges dumped on the ground. The people came for miles to take the fruit, but this could not be. How would they buy oranges at 20 cents a dozen if they could drive out and pick them up? And men with hoses squirt kerosene on the oranges, and they are angry at the crime, angry at the people who have come to take the fruit. 1 million people hungry, needing the fruit, and kerosene sprayed over the golden mountains, and the smell of rot fills the country. Burn coffee for fuel in the ships. Burn corn to keep warm, it makes a hot fire. Dump potatoes in the rivers and place guards along the banks to keep the hungry people from fishing them out. Slaughter the pigs and bury them, and let the putrescence drip down into the earth. There's a crime here that goes beyond denunciation. There's a sorrow here that weeping cannot symbolize. There's a failure here that topples all our success. The fertile earth, the straight tree rows, the sturdy trunks, and the ripe fruit. And children dying of pellagra must die because a profit cannot be taken from an orange. And coroners must fill the certificate, died of malnutrition, because the food must rot, must be forced to rot. The people come with nets to fish for potatoes in the river, and the guards hold them back. They come in rattling cars to get the dumped oranges, but the kerosene is sprayed. And they stand still and watch the potatoes float by, listen to the screaming pigs being killed in a ditch and covered with quicklime, watch the mountains of oranges slop down to a putrefying ooze. And in the eyes of the people there is the failure, and in the eyes of the hungry there is a growing wrath. In the souls of the people the grapes of wrath are filling and growing heavy for the vintage. It's John Steinbeck in The Grapes of Wrath. Well, John Steinbeck's work, The Grapes of Wrath, and perhaps the most iconic passage from it. On one hand, this money, this bailout, if you will, is being used to help these farmers pivot from these peaches to other crops. And so one could argue, maybe even correctly, that this is a good use of resources, that if the peaches cannot be distributed, then not only do the farmers stand to lose their ability to harvest a new crop next year without the intervention of the U.S. government, but it's also could be too late by that time for the farmers, and we might have then next year with no produce. But it's very difficult to imagine these, 50,000 acres? It was 50,000 acres? 50,000 tons, 50,000 tons of peaches going unused because they can't make a profit off its sale because the corporation that had contracts for these peaches went out of business. And yes, distribution and transportation is an issue. If you live in New York, you're not exactly going to be able to go get peaches. And these are clingstone peaches. They are more suitable for canning, from what I understand, than for just grabbing and eating. Why, I don't know. I'm not a big peach guy, I guess. But this is 50,000 tons of food that is going to be destroyed in the pursuit of farmers' profits. And of course, what's really interesting about framing it as farmers and helping farmers is that we're not talking about people who go and pick the fruit. We're not talking about people who maintain the orchards. Those are oftentimes migrant workers and many times illegal, so-called illegal immigrants who come to do the work. The farmers are the bourgeoisie. And oftentimes when these articles talk about the farmers and these farming families, they don't mean that there's a dad who wakes up at 4 a.m. to go tend to the peaches and raises and gets all his kids up at 5 to go milk the cows or whatever. We're talking about a person who owns property and then has employees go and do all the work for them. So these farming families are not families of small-time farmers. They are bourgeois families that are landowners. They are maybe not too dissimilar from some kind of medieval lord. And so in order to protect their investment, in order to protect their continued profits, we're helping to destroy food crop rather than finding another way to get it to the public for this harvest. And again, they've found another contract for 24,000 tons of peaches. Not going to be able to find any for the extra 50,000, so they are being destroyed. And in a country like America that does have an abundant poverty issue, and that does have a big food insecurity issue, and that does often have communities that are impoverished having low access to fresh produce, there is little that this can be described as other than a failure. And it is a failure of our system to provide for the people, and instead focusing on providing for the bourgeoisie, which we can comfortably say don't really count as people. And it's frustrating and it's tragic. And maybe one could, I would even make the argument that how are we going to get 50,000 tons of peaches to people who are hungry? It's not again, because they're intended for canning, they're going to be preserved, and if don't have the canning facilities, you're going to have to just give these peaches to people. 50,000 tons of peaches is a whole lot of fucking peaches. So maybe not, maybe you're not going to be able to get them to a whole lot of people before they start to go bad, which just has a kind of invites a different question about the way that we treat food in general. But again, canning and preserving food for distribution over great distances is pretty cool. So I guess in total, this is a very much more complicated article and complicated story than maybe we're used to, in the sense that very clearly so much food being wasted. The United States loves wasting food, even though we have so many people who are food insecure. And we're wasting a ton of food, and instead we're bailing out bourgeois landowners in order to make sure that they can maintain their wealth. And we're doing it by destroying food crops and replacing it with hopefully another crop that, with any luck, will be able to produce that same amount of food for next year. All in the shadow of a failure to distribute and provide for the actual working class, much like, as Steinbeck wrote back in the 1930s, because profit cannot be taken from a peach, it has to be destroyed. This week's book recommendation is Culture and Imperialism by Edward Said. Said, a Palestinian-American academic, continues building upon his arguments from his book Orientalism to detail how Western colonialism and imperialism have shaped and influenced our modern Western culture in totality. Police want to decide which journalists can cover the Delaney Hall protests. That's not their job. June 3, 2026, via The Guardian. The line of New Jersey State Police blocked every exit on the street. Clear plastic riot shields covered helmet to knee. A few dozen people were stuck inside their formation, known as a kettle. Some were protesters defying a curfew order, which was intended to quell demonstrations at a nearby ICE detention facility. But most appeared to be journalists who were just there to do their job. A helmet peeked over the shields, which parted to let him through. "Listen up," he barked. "If you're a press, you've got the opportunity right now, and that's it, to leave. If you don't leave out here in an orderly fashion, you're coming with us." Media workers had descended on Delaney Hall to document an ongoing hunger strike by ICE detainees over dangerous conditions inside. As protests swelled in surrounding streets, law enforcement's response contributed to dangerous conditions outside. In 1 week, the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker documented 30 assaults by officers and journalists near the facility. ICE doused several photographers with pepper spray and beat them with batons. Newsrooms around the country face a difficult calculation whenever police threaten arrests at demonstrations. Editors want the story, but they also want their reporters to make it home safely. Increasingly, the public learns what happens at protests through independent live streamers. While rarely employed by major outlets, some sell footage to the world's largest news organizations. Whether they work for a television network or stream on TikTok, they are engaged in journalism. On paper, both laws and courts tend to respect that press are exempt from curfews and dispersal orders. They recognize that media require sight and sound access to do their job. But on the street, constitutional protections for those live streamers can boil down to an officer's snap decision. New Jersey State Police quickly released most of the press and ordered them about 100 feet away. They posed no risk of obstruction from that distance, yet Newark police stepped in and ordered them even further down the road. Journalists objected, realizing that they would again be denied sight and sound access. An officer grabbed his radio to report that press wouldn't go any further. A voice crackled back over a speaker. "If they refuse to move, push them back yourselves." Back in the kettle, at least 3 journalists were stranded. Each would spend a full day in custody while lawyers were denied access to see them. One of the arrested journalists was injured and taken to a hospital. There he saw 2 arrested protesters being treated. Without press cameras rolling, it wasn't immediately clear how or if they were hurt while being detained. Before being handcuffed, the other remaining journalist had worn a blue vest emblazoned with the word press. An ID from his company dangled around his neck. Like the injured journalist, he was a member of the National Press Photographers Association. Officers on the scene told him that his credentials were not verified. Nationwide, it's unusual for police departments to issue press passes. Of the few that once offered them, most have long since abandoned that practice. Not that it was ever a good idea for police to pick who gets to cover the police. The point of press rights isn't simply to protect a chosen class of people. It's to protect the act of informing the public. If an officer can point at them and say that they are not press, the First Amendment ceases to have meaning. Among the journalists who were abused, pepperballed, tear-gassed, and pushed around by state and local and federal police at Delaney Hall are correspondents from Solidarity TV. Hopefully we'll have that video out for you very quickly, where you can see more about what was going on directly at Delaney Hall over this past weekend. The police have no right to determine who is or isn't a journalist. And in the day and age where journalism or reputable, but were formerly reputable, if still questionable, news programs have been rapidly overtaken by private interests, most notably Jeff Bezos buying the Wall Street Journal. No, the Washington Post, my mistake. Buying the Washington Post, the New York war crimes, constantly discrediting itself through its rampant support for violent imperialism for the past couple decades, and all of the other issues that modern mainstream so-called journalism has. Getting information directly from sources on the ground and not from mouthpieces of capital is so important. And that can be anyone from, professional trained reporters working at these news agencies, being there on the ground, reporting live. It could be people like correspondents with Solidarity Television going directly to the scene of the action, or it is people live streaming for posterity and for general public information who are complete amateurs and are doing it because it has to be done and they're the ones who are available. Which is always the case. Anywhere you go, a lot of news comes from people who are there on the ground, experiencing the situation, and are using sight and sound to learn about what is going on and to share it with the rest of the world. One of the most wonderful things about the smartphone is that, for better or for worse, everyone has a camera and a microphone and an internet connection right in their pocket to be able to gather information and display it to the public. This is the freedom of the press. The access to information. As the article says, the act of informing the public is very, very important. And it should never be allowed, or it should never be left up to the police to allow or disallow people from sharing that information. Whether it is on an official basis, such as issuing press passes, official press passes, whether it is things like the Pentagon stripping, journalists from non-preferred sources and only leaving, One America News Network, or to beat cops on the street, beat cops on the street, determining for themselves who and who isn't a journalist. One of the issues at Delaney was when they kettled journalists, the cops decided who was and wasn't a journalist and beat and arrested people who they felt didn't have the right credentials. The credentials being completely amorphous. There is no specific designation for what is or isn't verified, or who or is or isn't verified. The state of New Jersey hasn't ever made that determination. They certainly didn't at Delaney Hall, and even when press requested to find out what does make someone a verified press to be at these events, it has received no response. And the police saying, hey, if you guys don't stop recording, we're going to arrest you. The police saying press have to leave. It is all in order to both oppress freedom of speech and freedom of the press in order to keep the nation in the dark, and to threaten, of course, people who wish to expose what's going on, and to allow themselves the freedom to abuse the public without the watchful eye of the press. Because the public if the public isn't made aware of abuse, they're not going to be able to call for justice. As we saw in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, a effectively random passerby was the journalist who exposed Derek Chauvin's murder of George Floyd to the public. Same thing with the attack on Rodney King in 1991? 92? I think 92. Anyway, the attack on Rodney King that kicked off the LA riots. The ability for the layman to be a reporter, to be a journalist, to gather information and share it with the public, if we're going to get all patriotic about it, goes all the way back to Paul Revere or whatever. But it goes back to, anyone who is able to read or write, being able to distribute information. And it's very important for the reasons that we saw, to find and get justice for people who are being abused by the state's monopoly on violence. And when the violence is brought to bear on the people without it being recorded, it's easier for the state to get away with it. And that is why they oppress and repress journalism at places like Delaney Hall, where they are abusing prisoners who are being caught up for the crime of being the wrong ethnic group in the United States. And, the reason why the protests are taking place is that the abuses taking place at the Delaney Hall ICE detention center are being covered up and not even being open to investigation. As we know, the investigative bodies that even ICE themselves have are being shuttered, and they're not letting people in to investigate what is actually going on in the center. And now they are trying to block the general public from learning about what they're doing to the protesters and at the facility in general. So, your job is to, when you're on the streets here, is to be a good observer. And admittedly, part of that also means knowing when you need to stop being an observer and start being an active participant. We have, in some cases, way too many observers in some places. So, just keep that in mind next time you're involved in something, that you know when you have to be an observer and when you have to be a participant. But we need to, I don't know, it's trivial to say we need to hold police accountable, because they're never going to be held accountable. There's no holding the police accountable. Jersey, for those of you who might not know, Jersey is a so-called blue state. It's run by Democrats, and it's a state police and the local police in a blue city, in a blue state, brutalizing people on behalf of the ostensibly Republican crackdown on Hispanic and Latina people in the United States. So, holding police accountable, only we can do that as a general public, as members of the working class. We're the only ones who can actually make that happen. The wheels of justice will not move on behalf of the people. They must be moved by the people instead. Hey comrades, let's remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. In addition to eating right, if it makes sense for you, consider taking your bike out for a spin a few times this week. If you don't have a bike, go for a walk instead. You can often find bicycles at affordable prices at local yard sales too. Hondurasgate, the alleged U.S. and Israeli interference plot to destabilize Mexico and other progressive governments. May 7, 2026, via El País. A leaked audio recording points to former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernández, Javier Milei, and Donald Trump as attempting to create a platform to spread fake news about the administrations of Claudia Sheinbaum, Lula, and Gustavo Petro. The United States and Israel, with the help of Honduras, are allegedly positioning themselves on the geopolitical chessboard to control spheres of influence in Latin America. The news outlet Diario Red and the America Latina and the website Hondurasgate have revealed, in an investigation based on leaked audio recordings, the interventionist intentions of leaders of the global right. The objective: to undermine the administrations of Claudia Sheinbaum and Gustavo Petro, both of whom adhere to left-wing ideologies. In the conversation between Hernandez and current Honduran President Asfura, The former president tells a Honduran leader that he needs $150,000 to rent an apartment in the United States, where he plans to set up an office for a digital journalism unit. This unit will publish information about Honduran left-wing politician and former President Manuel Zelaya, who accused Trump of protecting the plunder of the state, referring to Hernandez's pardon by Donald Trump from his 45-year sentence for drug trafficking last November. On the same topic, in another alleged communication between the former Honduran president and the current vice president, Hernandez emphasizes the importance of having that liquidity, with the support of some Republicans, in order to attack and eradicate the cancer of the left in Honduras and throughout Latin America. According to the same leaks from Hondurasgate, Trump's pardon of Hernandez, days before the elections in Honduras, were not a gesture of clemency, but rather the initial payment in a larger agreement. In one of the recordings, Hernandez explains it directly, though without revealing his interlocutor. The pardon money didn't even come from you. It came from a group of rabbis and people who supported Israel. In another audio recording, he says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had everything to do with his release and the negotiations that made it possible. The conversations, according to the source, originated from WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram. They were recorded between January and April 2026. Sheinbaum, during her morning press conference this Wednesday, said that she did listen to the audio recordings and saw part of the news reports. They can set up a smear campaign office against our government in Honduras, using resources from a friendly nation. It won't affect us, not at all. There may be days of confusion, but if we remain true to our principles and know what we must do within the framework of our Constitution, the laws, and with respect for sovereignty, no one will be able to undermine the transformation project. It's that clear, Sheinbaum stated. Yeah, look, Mexico is a settler colony. It is not imperialist in the way the United States is, but it does have huge problems with the oppression and repression and the genocide of its own native peoples, just like the United States. And yeah, there are a lot of problems in Mexico. I don't think they're going to be solved by the triple geniuses of Javier Milei, Donald Trump, and Hernandez. And of course, that's not the point. The point of these three guys teaming up is they want to literally create fake news program to create disorder and dissent in particularly Brazil and Mexico and Colombia. Because Gustavo Petro of Colombia, even though he has an on-again, off-again friendly relationship with the United States and with Donald Trump, I guess, I don't know. I have some complaints about him, but as far as national leaders go, he's far from the worst. And he's trying, I guess. And Claudia Sheinbaum, I think, is doing to the best of my analysis, a bang-up job in Mexico again, as far as Mexico goes, and same with Lula in Brazil. And in contrast, Honduras is not great. The United States, I don't even need to explain that one to you. And Argentina, Javier Milei is like the dumbest guy in the world. Argentina is going to hell in a handbasket at his so-called leadership. I mean, who thought it was a good idea to have a self-described anarcho-capitalist in charge of anything? I wouldn't let him in charge of my workplace's water cooler. So, it's literally a conspiracy by these three guys, plus Benjamin Netanyahu, which makes it sound almost fantastical. Like, oh yeah, Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to get involved in Central America and South America. But of course, this is very par for the course for Israel. Obviously, Israel is part of the U.S. empire. It is a subject of and a branch of the United States. So of course they're going to be there when the United States is up to no good. And they have a long history of funding and supporting right-wing militancy, especially in Central and South America. If I'm not mistaken, they were allies of Pinochet and of the Argentine junta. And contrary to Israel's statement that Hamas has massacred the most Jews since the Holocaust, That was actually the Argentine junta with guns provided to them by Israel and other such atrocities across South America in which Israeli hands and Israeli guns are found at the scene of the crime. So, it's another way for the United States to get things done without getting directly involved or without looking like they're directly involved. Obviously, if Israel's doing it, then the United States is directly involved. But again, it's a little standoff approach, just like with the Iran-Contra affair, where we're using Israel to deal with weapons with Iran in order to drum up untraceable cash that we can then use to overthrow the government of Nicaragua, or at the very least, harass the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua with the use of far-right ultranationalist paramilitary units and death squads. Same kind of thing we're doing in Bolivia right now, but also have been doing in Colombia to help prevent left-wing movements and left-wing success in that country. Claudia Sheinbaum also is a pro-Palestinian Jewish woman who is, Mexican, and obviously she's president of Mexico, of course she's Mexican, is Mexican and the president of Mexico, and is making some pretty strong left-wing or left-leaning reforms in the country. Again, maybe not where we'd want, but it's really living in the United States and looking down and seeing Claudia Sheinbaum just over the border does make one very jealous. And I really want that Mexican chocolate bar, the Claudia Sheinbaum chocolate bar. Really want that. I've been dying for one ever since she announced it. And, she, unlike the United States, is actually doing stuff to fight against food insecurity and food deserts in Mexico. But, of course, just like with Cuba and just like with Venezuela, having left-wing success within the sphere of influence of the United States is a humiliation for the United States, but it's also a threat to the American imperialism and American bourgeois hegemonic power, because it shows an alternative to capitalism. It shows an alternative to the American monopoly. It shows an alternative to both other people in their regions. If one's living in Panama, they might be more inclined to follow Gustavo Petro or Claudia Sheinbaum than maybe the United States, if those two leaders are working out better for their countries than what we've got here in the United States. And so that threatens our hegemony and our power and influence and control. Additionally, of course, for those of you who aren't very familiar, Argentina was very successful, I guess it sounds like put a happy spin on it, in their genocide of their native population. They are effectively a white country in South America, the only one, is it Uruguay, Paraguay? Whatever, I don't know very much about either of those two. And so, they're going to be teaming up in this. They're a white nationalist settler colony, much like the United States and much like Canada and Australia and New Zealand. So, and on top of that, the Honduras, the former president who was imprisoned or sentenced to 45 years in a U.S. prison for drug trafficking, and the same way that Maduro was falsely accused of, and Gustavo Petro is falsely accused of by the United States, except this guy's our friend because he was actually smuggling drugs, and he's a right-wing kook who is conspiring with the Honduras government, which of course the United States controls, in order to help destroy and destabilize successful left-wing or left-leaning movements in Central and South America at the behest of the United States, and of course paid for by the United States, but through the U.S. proxy Israel. It would mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. GOP Gov signs harmful law creating a state database of trans patients. May 8, 2026 via LGBTQ Nation. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee, the Republican, signed House Bill 754 and State Bill 676 into law on Thursday. It requires all healthcare providers who receive state funding to provide information about their trans patients to the state for a publicly available database. While the individual patients won't be identified by name, LGBTQ+ and privacy advocates worry that the database, which will be available through the Tennessee Department of Health website, will make it easy to target gender-affirming doctors and identify members of the state's small trans population. The law requires gender-affirming care providers to report on any patients who received a transition procedure, the exact care they received, whether medication or surgery, their biological sex they were assigned at birth, their age, county of residence, their doctor's name and contact information, as well as any information on neurological, behavioral, or mental health conditions that they've been diagnosed with in the past, Huffington Post reported. Healthcare providers who do not provide this information could have their medical licenses suspended for at least 6 months. Their employers could be fined up to $150,000, and they would be subject to investigation by State Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti. The law also requires trans people seeking insurance coverage for gender-affirming care to also purchase coverage for detransition care, even though only an estimated 3% of trans people ever detransition. This requirement will likely increase healthcare costs for trans Tennesseans, making it more inaccessible. The law reportedly copies model legislation from the influential conservative anti-trans organization Do No Harm. The group has helped pass laws nationwide restricting access to gender-affirming care. The law could also violate patients' privacy rights under the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, a 1996 law that bans providers from disclosing healthcare information that identifies the individual or for which there is a reasonable basis to believe it can be used to identify the individual. Transgender and intersex Tennesseans, especially from less populated areas, will face the risk of having their health information revealed simply because of their gender identity and proximity to their healthcare provider. Miriam Nemeth, the executive director of the ACLU of Tennessee, said of the law. Nemeth called the law excessive governmental interference that establishes a dangerous precedent, especially since it only applies to trans patients and not those receiving treatment for any other medical condition. The law could intimidate trans healthcare providers into closing out of fear of government targeting, she added. Trans independent journalist Alexandra Vatka said of the law, every trans Tennessean will suddenly find themselves at risk of being singled out and targeted, both by the state and by members of the public wishing to harass and even potentially harm them. Lee has signed numerous pieces of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation into law recently. Last month, he signed a law banning the state's Medicaid program, TennCare, from covering or reimbursing puberty blockers, hormones, and transition surgeries, and another expanding the statute of limitations allowing patients and parents to sue healthcare providers over gender transition medical procedures. He also signed a law defining sex as a biological classification based on reproductive anatomy and birth genetics across all state statutes, affecting access to sex-segregated spaces like prisons, shelters, and restrooms. These guys kind of need a good copy editor. But that's aside. Believe it or not, it is not actually a violation, and the article doesn't say it is, but it is not a violation of HIPAA for the state of Tennessee to do this. The reason being that medical facilities have to actually provide these records at a state or court order. And so when the state of Tennessee makes this order, these companies, these healthcare conglomerates have to comply, even though it would otherwise be a violation of HIPAA. It's a problem. And like the article points out, there is really only one reason for this. It is to harass and intimidate transgender people in Tennessee and to threaten transgender people outside of Tennessee with the possibility that such a thing could be coming to them. Of course, other states will almost certainly be using this as a test case, see if it gets overturned by, say, the Supreme Court or other court bodies before implementing their own. And I expect to see this sort of thing spreading more throughout the country. The whole persecution of trans people is basically, I mean, it's when I say it's a whole lot of nothing, I don't mean that it's not real. I mean that all of the reasons that these guys have to persecute trans people are invented. And I certainly don't have to tell you that. But the big reason is that trans people are so few in number, and unfortunately with so few real legitimate allies, that they are easy targets, which of course comes with the order for us to make sure that they do not remain easy targets. It is up to us to help our trans brothers and sisters and neighbors to feel safe, protected, and to have strong allies. So that way, even though they may be few in number, they are not, small in power. And because they are easy targets presently, because people like you and I aren't doing good enough of a job to protect our neighbors, the state can go after them, and that makes it look like they're doing something. If, again, I've said this many times, if your chief concern is putting food on the table, but you can be distracted into thinking that, oh, well, sure, your kids, maybe your kids can't eat, but if they go into the public bathroom at the grocery store, there might be a trans person in there, and that's going to cause them a problem. And then the state says, well, we're going to stop that by taking care of the trans people. Well, they just solved a problem that they invented, but it makes them look like they did something. So it makes people feel safe and protected. It makes certain people, of course, feel safe and protected, and it makes them feel like they can trust the government, especially the Republicans, but also the Democrats, who have been increasingly hostile to LGBTQ plus people, especially trans people, who are repeatedly thrown under the bus by Democrat and even left-wing or other progressive persons and media or political personalities, which is beyond distressing and upsetting. So, so this is why they do it. But, the whole purpose of this sort of list is, it's going to render trans people vulnerable, especially people in much, much smaller communities who are going to be way more easily identifiable. I'm pretty sure that, a trans person living in the heart of Memphis, Tennessee, having all of their medical data leaked to a public database is going to be a lot less discernible than someone living in, I don't know any small towns in Tennessee, a small town in Tennessee, a county of 4,000 people. It's going to be a lot easier to narrow down who is trans on this list. And of course, that's going to open them to harassment, and it's going to make them feel vulnerable. And them feeling vulnerable, like the article describes, is going to, will hopefully, and I say hopefully in the sense of hopefully by the people passing this legislation, not you and I certainly aren't going to hope this, but will hopefully, in the views of the Republicans, be less likely to come out, less likely to be openly trans. I don't know. And it will hopefully intimidate medical professionals from being able to, or from wanting to, serve their patients. And the financial aspect of it too, it's going to be more expensive to get trans healthcare because you're going to need detransition insurance for the very few insignificant people who will need that. And it's absurd and it's appalling, and it's more and more proof that we, particularly in the United States, but also in places like the UK especially, which is so rampantly and violently transphobic, not too dissimilar from the United States, but they have some high-profile billionaires pushing that through, and just like we do here. And so it's really important for us to make the change in our communities to where trans people are going to be accepted and protected. We have to protect them ourselves. We have to put in the work to make sure that that happens. And we need to constantly fight back against transphobic people gaining power. If you're Democrat congressman or whatever, it's like, oh, trans people shouldn't play in women's sports. Get that fucker out. Or beat him into submission. Same thing for your family and friends. people in your community, if your local DSA chapter is being too wishy-washy on the issue of transgender rights, make them commit. You guys got to do that, and we all have to do that all over the place, over and over and over and over again. This kind of thing is unacceptable, and it has to be stopped, and we are the ones who are going to have to stop it. The Democrats aren't going to do it. The Republicans, obviously, aren't going to do it. It's going to be up to us as actual citizens to make that change socially and culturally, and then politically as well. We can't have any of this other stuff. Oh, we have the Trump guy, or we have the transphobic guy. Get them both the fuck out. We don't have time or interest in playing the lesser of two evils game. Same thing with Palestine. You're not going to compromise on trans rights. You're not going to compromise on Palestinian rights. You're not going to compromise on anybody's rights. Those days are over. We're done playing those games. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Your feed is a product of a stealth marketing campaign. May 15, 2026, via Vulture. Joe Lim estimates that 90% of what you see on the internet is advertising in disguise, and he should know. For 3 years, Lim ran a company called Floodify, which at its peak operated 650,000 dummy social media accounts used to drum up attention on behalf of paying clients. On a typical day, he says, Floodify posted 50,000 videos across TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, all of them designed to pass for the unscripted output of ordinary users. We promoted music for all the major record labels, says Lim, 29, who lives in San Francisco. We worked with a top 5 celebrity I can't name. We got 40 million views for an artist with just 100,000 followers. Floodify's services were in demand in politics too. When Eric Adams was running for re-election, his team asked me to do a campaign with videos of AI-generated influencers shitting on Mamdani. Lim says he turned down the Adams job not out of principle, but because a consultant working with the campaign stopped replying to his emails. The point of this kind of marketing is that nobody's supposed to notice it, but lately the machinery has started to show. In March, Jesse Corin and Andrew Spellman, co-founders of the digital music promotion agency Chaotic Good Projects, gave a live interview to a Billboard reporter at South by Southwest, in which they breezily described using sock puppet accounts to manufacture enthusiasm for artists at every level of the music industry, from major label pop stars to niche indie acts. Spellman called this practice trend simulation. His motto, everything on the internet is fake. Shady marketing and propaganda aren't new, but what is new is that the entire infrastructure of public conversation has been quietly captured by both. On social media, popular opinion is being formed, measured, and manipulated all at once, and every signal the platforms produce, a trending song, a backlash, a talking point, the feeling that everybody is suddenly talking about the same thing, can now be fabricated by unseen actors with hidden agendas. We've locked ourselves in the stupidest possible version of Plato's cave, where it looks like the spontaneous consensus of the hive mind is often just shadows on the wall, put there by marketers, political operatives, foreign influence campaigns, or anyone else with a few $100 and something to sell. The primary tactic used by companies like Chaotic Good and Floodify, and many, many others, is known as clipping. Someone hires a company to turn a song, trailer, interview, stump speech, or whatever into short, social media-friendly fragments, either by cutting the clips in-house or by farming them out to a network of freelance clippers. Those clips are then posted by normal-looking accounts. A meme page might serve up a quote about relationships with a new pop song playing behind it. A fan page for a horror movie might cut the scariest 20 seconds from the trailer into a loop and post it twice a day. Another account might chop the most entertaining exchange from a 3-hour podcast and rebroadcast it to people who would never sit through the entire episode. If enough of these clips rack up enough views fast enough, credulous social media algorithms interpret the spike as an authentic surge of interest and push the videos to real users, who sometimes generate real engagement, prompting the algorithm to push those videos even further. Anyone who wants to go mega viral now, they need to pour fuel on the fire, says Lim, who knows there is so much spam and pretend hype on the internet that nothing cuts through without artificial help anymore, not even huge artists with real audiences. Keith Presley, the co-founder of Gudia, a behavioral intelligence firm that uses AI to track the sources of viral phenomena, Put it more broadly, I don't know if we've found a true viral trend in a while. All of them are going to have some sort of inauthentic behavior behind them. Manipulating algorithms is only part of the goal. The other is fooling humans, particularly the dwindling number of journalists, critics, and other gatekeepers who are still capable of conferring legitimacy by paying attention. Reporters and editors who get their ideas from their social media feeds, which is most of them most of the time, can mistake a paid simulation of public interest for the real thing, and then make it real by covering it. The reason all of this is happening, probably more than any other, is that clipping is cheap. And not just cheap, cheaper than almost any form of advertising that has ever existed. A typical clipping campaign costs clients roughly $1 per 1,000 views, which marketers call a $1 CPM. By comparison, a billboard might cost $10 per 1,000 estimated passerby. A TV spot can cost $30 or more per 1,000 viewers. A magazine ad can run even higher. An officially purchased TikTok ad, the kind labeled sponsored, can cost 10 times what a clipping campaign does, with the added disadvantage that its viewers will know they're watching an ad. The math of clipping is so favorable to clients that in many cases, campaigns end up giving away views for free. Clipping agencies typically don't charge extra if a campaign's view count exceeds whatever the client originally paid for. Once a budget is met, the meter stops, but the clips that have been posted keep circulating. Krish Kawalarmi, the co-founder of the clipping agency Spade Clipping, told me that one of his recent campaigns cost a client less than $10,000 and resulted in nearly 100 million views. Why is anyone spending money on a billboard, he asked me, when I can get your brand in front of people for a fraction of the cost? Another one of these horrifying articles, although, frankly, at this point, we all probably kind of assumed that such a thing was going on, that this might be the case. And if you're on any of these apps, any of these social media stuff, you're not immune, no matter how niche of a community you've curated. I'm certainly not immune. I can tell you probably a big reason why I've started watching F1 this year is through stuff like that. Suddenly, posts appearing all over the place of cool and hype edits and whatnot. So, this, and of course, who sponsors these? Fucking Oracle and other such corporations. AI is a big sponsor. So, these are guys who want us to see this and associate, their product with something cool. And so, none of us are immune to this. It's happening to all of us. Even the outrage that we see about certain things is put forward by these companies. And, the whole article itself describes it even really, really big artists like Justin Bieber is doing this to create attention and to draw attention to his musical production. A guy who is a household name in most of the English-speaking world is relying on this. So, and it's that big, it's everywhere. And the fact that so little of our online experience can be traced to actual normal people and normal things in organic style, pages, I guess, it's concerning, and it should really make you question why you're starting to see certain viewpoints come across your feed. Who benefits from certain ideas? Who benefits from people thinking a certain way? Who benefits from you seeing these things? And it could be something as innocuous as, again, a song popping up over and over and over again. Every time some little clip of a song goes viral on TikTok or whatever, and everyone's now listening to the song, probably the people responsible for the song, either it's the artist or the producer or the record label or whatever, is doing it. And, yeah, that's insidious in its own way, but it could be relatively innocuous. Or to things like seeing, it's now very viral at the moment, is video footage of Chinese people being racist to, and abusively and violently racist towards small African children. This wasn't generated by the CIA or whatever. This isn't false stuff that's happening. It's not fabricated. But why is it being shown to you now and being shown to everybody all over the place, along with so-called organic sentiments that Black Americans must now be violently racist against all Asian people? Just as an example from this past week. Who stands to gain from that? And when actual political campaigns are doing this, or are attempting to, of course, Eric Adams is one of the most incompetent people in the world, so it's not surprised that they forgot to send emails about this. He actually, when asked, his campaign manager said that that they don't remember that happening, but they would have been in complete support of that fake disinformation campaign, creating, fake hate for Mamdani. And so we really have to make sure that we're isolating what it is that is being sold to us and why someone paid for us to see it. Is it to keep us distracted? Is it to keep us demoralized? Is it to give us misinformation? Is it to simply sell a product? What is that product associated with? What do they want us to get out of it? Again, this is why I brought up in the first place F1. One of the biggest racers, Max Verstappen, drives for Red Bull Oracle. What would Red Bull Oracle gain from pushing that to me and probably to other people as well? Obviously, the product of purchasing Red Bull beverages, which I don't, and associating Oracle, the completely evil AI war corporation that works for Israel and believes that Israel's genocide of the Palestinians, its assault on Lebanon, its occupation of Syria, and its expansion all across the West Bank, and of course its war on Iran and Yemen, not to mention its now assault on Mexico and Colombia and Brazil, and a company that uses AI-powered drones to mass murder people. It would want me or other people to associate that company and that brand with something positive, with something more interesting. So just from this alone, we can see both the political aspects and the capitalist and the productive aspects. Productive is the wrong word. The consumer aspects. And of course, all of this is capitalist drive for attention and profit. In the media world and in advertising in general, time is money and attention is time. So attention is money and they want to have your attention, so they will pay out the nose to get it. And what they do with that attention, or what they will try to get you to do when you're giving them that attention, can be innocuous, or it can be insidious, or it's always insidious. It can be innocuous or it can be hostile, but it's always insidious. And this is just another, if you will, rent-seeking behavior from the bourgeoisie to try to occupy and capture, and in many ways colonize your mind in order to get you to think, act, and spend in a way that they want. One of the other big examples from the full article is the Blake Lively situation, which I hardly paid attention to in the first place. Maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't have. I'm not really into the celebrity-style gossip. From what I understand, she had a problem with the director on a movie, and the director's PR team paid out the nose in order to create a smear campaign against Blake Lively in order to get the public to turn against her, not be on her side, and support her in her, I want to say, a sexual harassment case against him. So, which I remember people saying, oh, I knew she was terrible and stuff like that. I remember that popping up and I just didn't give a shit. But it shows that, the way that the public will treat people and victims of the powerful can be bought and manipulated, which we already knew, but it can be bought and manipulated in ways that seem to be and feel organic. Similarly with the Amber Heard case, I'm sure that, I don't know if that was involved, but I'm sure that they would have taken advantage of that if it were the case in order to get the public to continue to turn against the woman who was the victim in the situation. So we can expect that from now on pretty much in every situation. So again, you're not immune. The only way to be immune is to stay completely off social media. You're watching this on YouTube, so you're not. It is what it is. And, keep in mind what the people's thought, people's conversation is being manipulated, being purchased for pretty low amounts of money by people who want you to think, act, and spend in ways that benefit them. So just keep a closer eye on what's going on. Be a little bit more hesitant to believe everything you feel right off the bat. Don't necessarily take all things as being organic. And, think things through more before making snap decisions or going with the crowd. Analyze and think deeper. Solidarity TV has helped produce a leftist quarterly magazine titled The Comrade Quarterly. Get your copy, submit your work, or learn more at comradequarterly.org. Congress advances U.S.-Israeli military integration plan, May 30th, 2026, via Al Jazeera. A provision in a bill before the United States Congress could tie the U.S. and Israeli militaries far more closely together, deepening their cooperation on weapons research, production, and technology. The proposal, titled the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, appears as Section 224 of the House Armed Services Committee's version of the fiscal year 2027 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, the annual U.S. defense policy bill. The measure is still at an early stage. The NDAA is passed by Congress each year to set U.S. military policy and authorize defense programs and spending levels. If enacted, the provision could mark a significant change in one of the world's closest military relationships, shifting the two countries from a partnership centered largely on U.S. military aid towards one in which their defense industries are more deeply intertwined. Section 224 would require the U.S. Defense Secretary to appoint an executive agent, a single official to coordinate military cooperation between the U.S. and Israel. That work would cover joint research and development, the shared production of weapons, and the linking of military systems and data. What Congress is trying to do now is find different ways of entrenching the relationship so deep in America's own defense industrial base that it's impossible to root it out. Josh Paul, a former U.S. Department of State official and founder of the advocacy group A New Policy, said about the controversial provision. A new section of law in the National Defense Authorization Act would give Israel unprecedented access to American technology and would force the United States military to integrate Israeli defense technologies into our own critical military supply chain, giving Israel incredible leverage over America's own defense priorities, he added in a video posted on social media on Friday. The bill would extend their joint work into many more areas of modern warfare, from artificial intelligence to drones and cyber operations. The provision comes amid turmoil in the Middle East following a joint U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran earlier this year. In February, U.S. and Israeli forces attacked Iran, triggering 5 weeks of war. Iran struck back at Israel and at U.S. bases in the Gulf region before a ceasefire took hold in April. Israel is also facing genocide allegations in a case brought by South Africa at the International Court of Justice, the top court of the United Nations, over its war on Gaza. The bill must first clear the House Armed Services Committee, which is due to take it up in early June, and then pass a full House and the Senate. It is proposed by the committee's Republican chairman, Mike Rogers, and its most senior Democrat, Adam Smith, giving it support from both main parties, even as opinion polls suggest growing opposition among most Democrats and some Republicans to further military support for Israel. The U.S. has supported Israel's military for decades. Since 2008, U.S. law has required Washington to protect Israel's qualitative military edge, keeping its forces stronger and more advanced than those of any rival in the region, on the grounds that a small country must rely on better weapons rather than greater numbers. Under the current aid deal signed during the administration of former President Barack Obama, Washington provides Israel with about $3.8 billion a year in military assistance. The 10-year agreement runs through 2028. Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid since 1948, almost all of it now military and worth more than $300 billion when adjusted for inflation. The nature of that support may now be changing. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said recently that he wants to end Israel's reliance on U.S. military aid within 10 years, saying his country had come of age. Closer cooperation between the two defense industries, rather than cash, would likely fit that goal. Today, June 4th, 2026, an article from Al Jazeera. An amendment to Cenk the pro-Israel measure introduced by Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna failed in a voice vote on Thursday in the House Armed Services Committee. Yeah. So, now, of course, what does it go to? Now it goes into the bill and it goes into the vote on the floor. And Thomas Massie has already promised that he's going to introduce a vote to pull it from when it gets to the House floor. I hate that we have to that Thomas Massie keeps stepping in to save the day. He sucks so bad, and everything that's, he's been and he's stood for often throughout the years sucks so bad. There's a reason why they're getting him out, why so much money was spent to get him out in Kentucky. And it's really annoying that he's our ally. We have goddamn Adam Smith. Now, granted, there may be 2 Democrats in the House that I have any sort of faith in at all. So, when it's like, oh, Democrat Adam Schiff is all in support of this, I'm not surprised. I'm not terribly surprised. I can't express shock. But, Netanyahu himself is coming in and asking for this, and it's being passed in bipartisan votes. And from this article, Congressman Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the panel, said he was very sympathetic to Khanna's frustration with Netanyahu, and said that, I don't like his leadership of Israel or where this is going, but the U.S. interests, it is in the U.S. interest to have deep military ties with Israel, a country, a reason that we have these partnerships with Israel where we may not have as many developed partnerships with other NATO countries, and Israel is not part of NATO, is because Israel has actually been having to fight. They have faced drone attacks and missile attacks. They've had to develop new technologies and technologies we've benefited from. Drone and missile attacks? Are you kidding me? First of all, Israel has not been creating new technologies to fight against drone attacks. We know that for sure. Hezbollah has been putting those boys in a fucking blender. Thank God. Every single day you get some new troop transporter or tank from Israel just getting blown to smithereens by a dollar drone that Hezbollah whipped together out of children's toys in a basement somewhere. So they're not exactly making good, effective anti-drone technology. Sure, they can use their billion-dollar weapon systems that we give them to shoot down Shaheds fired from Iran, but, they're not exactly innovating. And, they're under missile attack. Yeah, from, Hezbollah, who's using, quite frankly, not Hezbollah, well, from Hezbollah too, but from Hamas, who's using, $20 piping for missiles. So, we're not exactly talking about the most sophisticated weaponry here. And that's no dunking on Hamas. I could not build a missile in my backyard at all, let alone, and I have access to a ton more stuff than Hamas has under blockade and starvation in their concentration camp imposed on them by Israel. Of course, we're all big fans of Hamas here, and Hezbollah and Ansarallah and Iran as well. So, when I said that Israel is not exactly fighting sophisticated weaponry in a lot of these cases, they're battle-tested stuff, and that's no diss on their victims. They're battle-tested stuff. They're bombing civilians. Anyone could do that. The Unabomber did that. Are we gonna pull out Ted Kaczynski and have some kind of great, intimate, deep partnership with him? He bombed civilians. About the Oklahoma City bombing, he also blew up a random building full of kids. Is he some great, he's so battle tested, we need to have him as part of the federal government? I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. He was a white ultranationalist. So, this integration with the United States formally integrating Israel into our military apparatus is, of course, a huge concern when, these guys are not just a random military. They're not even necessarily in league with Western, I don't say in Western values, with Western corporate interests, the way that, say, Ukraine might be. These guys are legitimately ultra-nationalist psychopaths. Maybe they are kind of like Ukraine. But, other countries that we might develop intimate partnerships with, are not necessarily religious ethno-supremacists who believe that they are God's gift to humanity. It's pretty much restricted to Israel, and of course, obviously, American Christians believe that too, for some godforsaken reason. And, these guys are a legitimate threat to, I don't want to say the American way of life. I don't even want to say the American public, because they are the American public distilled in its finest form, right? They are a huge threat to the rest of the world. And integrating them into us just brings that threat, I don't know. As I'm saying it, part of me is thinking it's not that much different from what's going on now. But I don't want their military technology here. I don't want their military AI programs here. I don't want their military thought process here. We already have to deal with too many ultranationalists and religious zealots and ubermensch-minded people. We don't need a new brand of radical Nazis coming into the U.S. military. And not to mention that the only reason we're doing this partnership with them, or considering it, is because it's in America's best interests. Not in my best interest. It's not in my interest at all. Not in yours if you're an American. Certainly not in yours if you're not an American. So, the only people that this benefits are the ruling class and the military corporations and the diehard Christian nationalists. And, of course, the Zionist Nazis and supremacists who make up the so-called State of Israel. So, we'll see where this ends. We'll definitely keep you updated on this as it unfolds. Maybe Massey on his way out will pull a miracle out of his ass and, take it out. But we all know that the Democrats are huge supporters of the genocide of the Palestinians. They absolutely love Israel, and they're in full support of everything that Israel does. Obviously, I don't even have to tell you that the Republicans are even more so. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And this is a whole bunch of dog shit. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Trump's Justice Department scrubs its website of news releases about January 6 defendants. May 23, 2026, via AP News. The Department of Justice is acknowledging it has removed from its website news releases about criminal cases related to the January 6, 2021 riot, calling the information about the prosecutions partisan propaganda. The purge of news releases documenting criminal charges, convictions, and sentencings is the latest step by the Trump administration to dramatically rewrite the history of the assault on the Capitol, when hundreds of supporters of Republican President Donald Trump stormed the building in an effort to halt the congressional certification of his 2020 election loss to Democrat Joe Biden. Trump, on his first day back in office in January 2025, pardoned, commuted the prison sentences, or vowed to dismiss the cases of all of the 1,500-plus people charged with crimes during the Capitol assault, including those convicted of attacking officers with makeshift weapons such as flagpoles, a hockey stick, and crutch. On Monday, the Justice Department announced the creation of a $1.776 billion fund meant to compensate Trump allies who feel they were unjustly investigated and prosecuted. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche has not ruled out that rioters convicted of violence will be eligible for payouts, prompting bipartisan anger in Congress. After a journalist on Friday observed that the social media platform Twitter that the Justice Department is quietly removing news releases on its website that were related to his January 6th attack, including about a Texas man who pled guilty to assault and also faced separate state charges of soliciting a minor, the department responded through its rapid response account that there was nothing quiet about it. We are proud to reverse the DOJ's weaponization under the Biden administration. We will do everything in our power to make whole those who are persecuted for political purposes, the Post said. This includes stripping DOJ's website of partisan propaganda. Among the releases removed from the site were those concerning seditious conspiracy cases against members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, far-right extremist groups. The Justice Department, in an unopposed motion last month, asked a federal appeals court to vacate the seditious conspiracy convictions, a request that was granted Thursday. The department on Friday moved to dismiss the cases against the group members. Pentagon appoints convicted January 6 rioter to sensitive counter-terrorism role, June 2, 2026, via The Guardian. Elias Irizarry, who pled guilty to a misdemeanor charge in connection with the storming of the U.S. Capitol, has been appointed to a position in the U.S. Department of Defense's Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict Office, which manages highly classified military operations, causing alarm among Pentagon officials. Irizarry was 19 at the time of the attack, which took place after Trump supporters marched on the Capitol seeking to prevent the certification of the 2020 presidential election, which was won by Joe Biden but which Trump falsely claimed was stolen. He expressed regret and apologized for his actions in court, but was criticized by the judge in his case for failing to stop the violence, despite having been in a position to do so. Irizarry has since graduated from the Citadel Military Academy in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was a student at the time. It was unclear who was responsible for his appointment, the Post reported, but Pentagon officials are said to have voiced dismay that someone involved in a full frontal assault on U.S. democracy could be installed in such a sensitive post. 5 people died during or in the immediate aftermath of the event. 4 police officers involved in trying to resist the attack died by suicide in the months afterwards. According to the Post, Irizarry will serve in a position attached to a counterterrorism and an irregular warfare team comprising of about 40 people. The team's responsibilities are said to cover areas including embassy security, personnel recovery, and hostage rescue. In the case of rescue extraction missions, it can place our special operators in some of the most complex and dangerous environments we ask of them, said one person speaking anonymously, told the paper. To put someone so junior and new to Department of Defense, and with such a checkered background, into such a sensitive portfolio raises serious questions for leadership. Joel Valdez, the Pentagon's acting press secretary, confirmed and defended the appointment in an email, while attacking the Washington Post journalists who first reported on his appointment. Mr. Elias Irizarry is a qualified, patriotic young professional, and we are proud to have him as a political appointee at the Department of War, said Valdez. Unlike Mr. Irizarry, the Washington Post does not care about national security, given its track record of low-tier reporters publishing and soliciting classified information that could hurt our nation on a daily basis. Irizarry pled guilty to charges of entering and remaining at a restricted building and was sentenced to 14 days in jail, according to court filings. He expressed remorse at his 2023 sentencing, saying, "I am ashamed because I will always be a part of this disgrace. January 6th represented something truly horrible. It was the largest attack on our democracy since the Civil War." His record before the rioting has been quite commendable, this judge said at the sentencing, Taya Chakutin. She offered to write him a letter to help him reapply to the Citadel, from which he had been discharged because of his involvement in the episode. He was later readmitted and graduated in 2024. He has since run unsuccessfully for a seat in the South Carolina state legislature, losing in 2024 to a Republican primary. It's been over 5 years since the January 6th insurrection, and basically nothing has come of it, which is really a disgrace on the Democrats in general. yet another disgrace on them. And, they had 4 years to do something about this, and they didn't. So I can't even express all that much surprise, or disappointment, really. I certainly can't express surprise. Can't express all that disappointment in these guys now being rewarded for their participation. Of course they're going to be rewarded. If we didn't want them to be rewarded, maybe Kamala Harris and the Democrats shouldn't have shilled out to Israel so much during their campaign and totally tanked the election in favor of Donald Trump, because they were more willing to have a Trump presidency than they were to have a pro-Palestinian platform. Or any platform at all. She didn't run on anything. I digress. I don't digress. The blame falls, of course, on the Democrats for not doing anything at all. And so, having this stuff removed from the DOJ website and all that is just the reward that they get for sticking it out. The only positive thing I can say about these rioters, these insurrectionists, the terrorists, if you will, is that if they actually believed that the election was stolen, they did what was a pretty reasonable thing to do. Obviously, the only reason they pretended to think that the election was stolen was because they didn't want the other guy to win. They wanted to keep their guy in power. They wanted to feel big and tough and powerful and blah, blah, blah. They didn't actually think that the election was stolen or that it was rigged. And all of the powers that were telling them that that was the case didn't believe it either. If they had any reason to believe, then we can, again, not accept it or agree with it, but it was not the most unreasonable thing to have occurred. And I only point that out because you'll see on occasion other people say, oh, well, the 2024 election was rigged, but they didn't care to do anything about it. So I don't think they really believe that either. Or they believe more in, which wouldn't surprise me either, they believe more in feeling right than doing right. But whatever. I'm not here to say that these guys, that the January 6 guys were, justified in any way. They all suck and are all traitors to the United States. Although, I will point out, the United States isn't exactly worth being loyal to in the first place. But, of course, they are fascist reactionaries. Not, they weren't disloyal to the United States for any sensible or moral reason. So, we're not going to hype them up too much for that, or at all. And the whole myth now that this was partisan propaganda is, I want to say it's unconscionable, but are we really surprised at this point? He's getting no pushback on it, and at the time they're like, oh well, actually it was Antifa raiding the Capitol and framing the Republicans for it, but now we're going to give all these guys money and buy them off and reward them and give them the stupid symbolic 1776 billion or whatever it was for this, $1.776 billion fund. Really, I don't know. These guys need to just make it the 1.448 or 1.488 billion. Like, we all know what you actually mean by that. And I don't know. There's such a degree of farce and absurdity and falsehood to this that almost makes it comical because of how egregiously corrupt the whole situation is. And yet nothing's going to be done to stop it at all. It's never going to be reversed. It's just the way it is now. And I guess we just have to live with it. I mean, they're removing stuff about seditious conspiracy from the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So, It's just nothing's going to come of that. And now we even have guys in government who were part of this. Now, I don't want to say I'm going to give this kid a break for being 19 and stupid. A lot can change in 5 years. I certainly, when I was 24, 25, I was certainly not the same person I was when I was 19. So, maybe something came of this. I don't think he should have been allowed to go through military school. It's because he apologized for being a part of an insurrection. But hey, the last time we had a major insurrection, we didn't deal with those guys either. Every single one of those Confederate officers should have been hanged. Every single person who was ever participated in slave owning should have been drawn and quartered in public square. Every single one of them. And we didn't do shit about them either. So, this is just par for the course for the United States of America. Although having a guy who doesn't really care about national security and who participated in treason against the government, being in charge of stuff in the Department of War and covert operations is honestly probably a good thing for the Global South. We don't want the stupid-ass Fort Bragg guys to be monitored by someone competent. We certainly don't want them to be monitored by someone who is going to actually be good at their job. But I don't know, maybe some guy who's going to be so adherent to fascistic tendencies that he'll storm the Capitol for him. Maybe he shouldn't be in charge of that either. But again, this should never have been allowed to happen, and it was allowed to happen because the Democrats would not get their shit together because they didn't care to. They didn't want to. They needed these guys to be scary, 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 so the American public would vote for them, would vote blue no matter who. Look how well that turned out. But at the same time, we're also, I don't know, as a socialist, I don't necessarily believe in punitive justice instead of rehabilitative justice. And if the Emperor of China can be turned into a normal citizen, I tend to believe that some 19-year-old dumbass can also be turned into a normal citizen. Of course, now he works for the federal government in the military, so, I'm not exactly sure that's a positive step, probably a step backwards, if we're being honest. But, again, I do think at a certain point we're going to have to realize that for a good chunk of the country got and is swept up in the MAGA craze, and that they are, of course, going against their class interests, and at some point a bunch of them are going to flip, and when that happens, unfortunately, we're going to have to work with them. It is what it is. Now, I'm not talking about people like Graham Plattner, who were a willful Nazi, who was an actual neo-Nazi with neo-Nazi tattoos, won't get them removed. I think he finally did. And volunteered as a Blackwater mercenary. People who actually did and are unapologetic about doing horrible things for a decade. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about people whose sins were voting wrong and being an asshole, not mass murdering people, not being a police officer, not being a soldier, not being an ICE agent. And so being a dumbass who got swept up in the January 6th stuff when you're 19 years old, unfortunately, we're going to have to find some grace for some of these people at some point. It's just really annoying. I don't want to do that, but we have to. China put out a really good example for us with Hu Yi, the last emperor of China. And it's one of the hard parts about living in society, in a society, I suppose. Solidarity TV has helped produce a leftist quarterly magazine titled The Comrade Quarterly. Get your copy, submit your work, or learn more at comradequarterly.org. Every week there is more news than we can reasonably cover. Here's an article update that you don't want to miss. Feds drop case against man arrested in Las Vegas biolab investigation. May 26, 2026, via News 3 Las Vegas. Federal prosecutors have dropped their case against the Israeli national man arrested in connection with the biolab uncovered in Las Vegas earlier this year. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Nevada filed a motion earlier this month to dismiss the criminal complaint filed against Ori Solomon, also spelled as Salomon, in the complaint. Prosecutors had charged him with an illegal possession of a firearm in the U.S. District Court for Nevada. An FBI complaint alleged that his immigration status precluded him from owning or possessing a gun. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police and the FBI jointly announced Solomon's arrest after responding to an alleged biological laboratory found in an East Las Vegas home in January. LVMPD said Solomon, identified as a home's property manager, was arrested on suspicion of disposing and discharging hazardous waste. State-level case against him remains ongoing in Las Vegas Justice Court, though a criminal complaint has not yet been filed. A status check is scheduled for June 4th. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.